Welcome back. You're watching the blockbuster budget roundtable. The key question that was uppermost in everyone's mind was, will this budget revive investor sentiment? We've got some of India's biggest investors around this roundtable. I want to ask Sunil Kantmunjal first. Do you feel more confident? Indian industry was taking its money abroad. Will we see that trend reverse? Will you invest back in the India growth story?
I think there are two things one can see through this budget speech that we saw. One, of course, it was the longest speech one has heard in a very long time. But I also think it was very long. And I agree with Arun. When the speech was going on, I was wondering, what is he actually trying to do? He's taking up so many micro issues with little allocations. But as you sit back and think about it, what he's done is he's covered a full spectrum of all aspects of life for agriculture, average citizen, industry. So everybody's got their concerns addressed in this budget speech. The question really is going to be about the ability to implement and execute all of these quickly and with timeliness.
So will this bring more foreign direct investment into India, which is on a downward
If you're able to, it will bring more investment. If you're able to bring the sense of confidence in India that the ability to set up a new enterprise becomes easier, and the ability to operate a new existing enterprise becomes easier, of course more money will come in. And by the way, we only need Indians to invest. Once Indians are investing, foreign investment is going to come regardless.
Rahul, but will this revive investor sentiment? Will everyone be bullish about the India growth story once more?
I would think so, but though I'm not personally involved, but not abolishing the thing which Mr. Pranab Mukherjee did in his budget was a letdown.
Why didn't you do that, Piyush?
Well, I think doing it now would have been one more retroactive amendment. So it didn't make
signal
sense.
That's the end of the retrospective tax. You said you like tax.
It didn't make sense to bring in further unpredictability into the system. In fact, he has taken three major steps. A, he said we'll let the courts decide, and I think that will bring a finality to whatever is pending in the courts. B, he said those cases which are not in litigation, we'll set up a committee to quickly scrutinize it and sort it out. And three, he has proposed to enlarge the scope of the Income Tax Settlement Commission so that taxpayers may approach that commission for settlement of disputes. This will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for any taxpayer to completely bring an end to all his tax disputes. That's what he
said that, but I don't understand.
Mr. Sanjay Reddy, will this revive investor confidence? Instead of people exiting projects, will this make people feel, okay, let's go back and invest in the India story?
I think so, because, first of all, we've seen that this government is only 45 days old. So I think we have to give them a bit of time more. So there's a lot of intent here, but they've also covered a comprehensive areas. And the way I look at it is that they've planted a lot of seeds, and we have only 8 months left in the year. So it depends on which grow faster. I'm sure government will put more money after that. So I see that they're trying to cover as many areas as possible, especially in infrastructure. I think there's been a lot of focus and attention which is absolutely critical on financing, on setting up the 3P India model, which is talking about reinventing the entire PPP story. That is required because, now we're doing bits and pieces that will not work. We need to rethink the whole model. And once that is done in a comprehensive manner, I see clearly investors are going to come back.
Naushad, folks, your sense.
So, I think the budget was very good on principles. I think it was somewhat weak on the specifics and the implementation. And I think, therefore, you need to actually ask that question in 3 months or 6 months. In 3 months' time, if we see many specifics in place where the principles are turning into reality on the ground, then it's going to turn investment around in a big way. It's going to turn sentiment around in a big way. In itself, I don't think it does.
You're saying by itself, the budget doesn't.
The budget itself.
But the nuts and the bolts.
But I think that's right. I think so.
I'm not so confident we'll have such a huge increase in the manufacturing sector, in spite of all the announcements. And the reason is like this. If I look at the auto industry from which I represent, we've had terrible 2 years, last 2 years, one of the worst we've ever had. And about 70,000 crores was invested in the industry in the last 5 years. We have excess capacity running to about 40% of the industry. So commercial vehicles is in a mess. They're running at like 25% below 2 years ago. So to get this back up is important for the manufacturing sector. The auto industry is really the engine of growth for and the driver for the capital goods, for a whole host of things. And unless the demand picks up or we do something to increase the demand in the auto sector, very the manufacturing sector is not going to pick up that.
That demand is a function of the economy.
Yeah. It's function of the economy, but there are things we can do.
That's the leading indicator of the economy.
Yes, but there's low-hanging fruit. Sorry. Yeah. There are low-hanging fruits. A lot of countries have used fleet modernization plans. Many things have been done. We've suggested many things to the government how to quickly boot up the vehicle sector, and it will make a big difference in jobs and in the economy.
We were working very closely with Vikram and us on this issue, and unfortunately the finance ministry then did not see much reason or support us the way we wanted it. But actually what he's saying is right. Even now in this budget, we really don't see any of those specifics being addressed. Maybe for shortage of time, but on lack of full understanding of the issue.
The excise benefit
and number two, most importantly, for the auto sector, the reduction of interest rates. You see, ultimately, every automobile in India is being bought on an EMI. And when the EMI, the interest rates don't come down, there is no mention of that or no indication of that. But that affects the auto industry in terms of the buying pattern.
That also affects the investment.
Okay, I want to ask Mr. Ajeshram, given the fact that so many foreign investors were really turned off the India story, do you see the effort that Piyush and Mr. Jaitley and the Prime Minister have made changing that? Or do you think they'll still be circumspect?
I think it is changing the sentiment, and I'm not taking only the budget document per se. I'm taking the actions taken by the government in the last 35 days also. If you see, the government is looking at bringing about positive changes in the running of the economy virtually every day or every second day. So I think the budget document per se is not the end of it all. I think changes are going to continue happening where they are setting a groundwork now. For instance, you take investment allowance. That's a very positive. In terms of industrial parks, corridors, look at the focus on agri. I think ultimately all these, when we're talking about demand build-up, demand has to come from every individual in the country. It's not only manufacturing. FDI has opened up, whether it's defense, whether it's insurance, e-commerce. These are things which were blocked earlier. They've all been opened up now. So I think it's a positive direction, and I think the sentiment in the country has changed.
Mr. Puri, do you see sentiment change in the back of this budget?
1 month.
Or do you think it stops short of actually reviving sentiment?
I think that it'll still make people wait to see what else the government does. I think it's one step, but not such a large step. And I think the fact that the government is only in power for a short period of time is, of course, something in their favor. But I'm really looking for structural change in the economy. I'm looking for structural change in the way taxes are administered, collected, and so forth. I didn't see this in this budget, right? Or didn't see it clearly. The economic survey had a clearer declaration of intent and vision. Now, if some of that can be translated, that farmers can sell their produce anywhere, that there will be no planning commission, there will be a productivity commission, that there will be a monitoring of ministries. So this economic survey, if they can translate that into budget and administrative
Why couldn't that happen, Piyush?
I think structural change. I think one of the biggest structural changes is the number of ministers we have now vis-a-vis the number of ministers we had in the past. I think that's a structural change. So I think that's where
one of the points that has come up about investors' confidence, a lot has been said. I want to make a point that investors' confidence in any country is a function of our ability to give an ease of functioning to the entrepreneurs. What has been indicated in the budget that says, as Mr. Puri said, there will be less governance, there will be less complicated procedures, nothing whatsoever. Therefore, I
need to respond to that.
No, you respond, but I've not finished. The other point, as Mr. Manjul said, a lot of things were addressed on a micro basis in a very long budget speech. I have nothing against it. But as we say in a court of law, the weight of the argument is never to be measured by its length. The fact that so many things were said really made it into a potpourri of so many things without nothing very concrete or specific. It was a good statement of intent on certain counts. For example, venture capital fund of 5,000 crores is a good step. 10,000 crores is a good step. But all other things
taxes, making a
administered by the government.
That's a very tangible step.
Venture capital fund administered by the government. If they administer that 10,000 crores a year, I can guarantee you great stories of scandals for us. 3 years from now.
No, just
With
to
RTI,
set the perspective, I think
we will all be sharpening the knives
one
right
point
now.
being missed in this whole debate is the policy statement that a budget is supposed to reflect only gives a direction. What I do now in my power ministry, how I bring about policy changes, how I run the ministry to make all that happen, is what is ultimately going to benefit.
I take a very quick break and we return. Given the fact that the full focus is on PPP, public-private partnership, a model which hasn't worked in the last 5 years, can this government put so much expectation and hope on making that model work? We've got lots of people who burn their fingers also in this model. Who'll talk about this when we return on the other side of a very quick break.
Burnt more than his fingers.
Welcome back. You're watching the CII Blockbuster Budget Roundtable. In the last part of this program, we focus on the PPP model, the private-public participation model, which the government is pinning so much hopes on. And I want Mr. Reddy first to talk about what the problems with the current model are, and are you hopeful that whether it's the rail budget or the general budget, this seems to be one of the tentpole ideas of the NDA government. It's failed with the UPA. Will it succeed now? Can it succeed?
If I may add, Rahul, he's one of the foremost
losers.
Foremost privates in many of those PPPs.
Yes.
And we have some role.
We have
An important one.
You know, our company set up India's first PPP in 1992. Then we are currently in 2 areas of PPP. One is in infrastructure, airports, roads, power. But more importantly, in the social sector as part of GVK Foundation, where by the December this year we have 50,000 employees in our not-for-profit organization, and again under public-private partnerships. I think for a country like India, with government having limited resources, it is not a choice. I think PPP is a must. It is here to stay, it is here to stay forever, and it's going to take a bigger and bigger share going forward. Now what's happened in the PPP in the last 3 to 4 years is unfortunate. It may be due to court cases, it may be due to lack of coordination, it may be due to lack of decision making, and kind of changing the goalposts after you've signed everything. That is not very difficult to fix, but what one needs to do is re-engineer the entire PPP model, and that's why I was so excited to hear the FM announced that he's going to give 500 crores to an organization called 3P India. He's trying to bring an institutional framework which will re-engineer the entire PPP model for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So
Mr.
I'm quite excited about it.
Do you see a model that failed in the past succeed now and propel the government and give it the growth that it needs?
Of course, why not? I mean, if something fails,
it's the same model.
It doesn't mean, no, the model will change. It has to be rectified, whatever the weaknesses were. But I fully agree with Sanjay that only government, whether money and then management, they can't do it. And only private sector won't have the money to do it. So the only solution is public-private partnership, but there were problems. I was not involved in it like he was, so I wouldn't know the nitty-gritty of what were the problems. And I'm sure there can be crooked private sector people. That's what got it a bad name. There were some crooked private sector people, but it doesn't mean it can't be put right.
Can it be fixed right? A model that failed, a model on which Mr. Jaitley, Piyush Goyal and the Prime Minister have so many hopes?
Well, certainly it can be fixed. In fact, where it has worked very well. You have the airports of Delhi and Bombay. They are spectacularly good airports. They are both PPP airports. In fact, they are the finest examples of PPP working out in India. Under the same model, many things have not worked. Look, what is PPP? In PPP, 1P, that is private, brings the capital and entrepreneurship and management. The other P, which is the state, public, brings in the resources, the legislative framework and regulatory framework. So if you build a highway, I will give you land, I will give you the right of way, right? You build this highway and make money. I will also tell you in consultation with you where to put the toll plaza. If you check with them, a lot of the highway projects are today stranded because of disputes over where to put the toll plaza. And many of those disputes arise not because there is any principled view on it, but that's because some politician in the local area or in the state wants a toll plaza in a certain way, so his constituents have the free run. One of the foremost examples of this is the 6-laning of the highway, say, from Panipat to Jalandhar, which is a very heavily used highway in India. In fact, somebody should be held accountable for all the deaths that are taking place because it's a stranded asset. So it can be very easily fixed. It's not a difficult thing to fix. And if you fix it, let me just take half a second more, it will have downstream effects that you can't imagine. You know, you talked about how will you help the poor or people with EMIs. This will help EMIs because banks have lakhs of crores of money now stuck in stranded PPP projects. The moment these NPAs become sort of proper loans,
Shekhar in Maharashtra, Raj Thackeray doesn't want toll nakas at all.
Okay, Mr. Munjal, Can the model be fixed? How can it be fixed?
Yeah, the model works worldwide, by the way. It's not anything unique or new India has tried. The model is well known. You have to design a concession which is fair to both sides. I think that's the first key. The method of giving these outs needs to be objective and transparent. And we failed on some of these counts, which was the only reason there was a problem. Otherwise, this is actually the perfect way to build infrastructure, as Rahul just said, to build the expertise of management and operations from the private sector and the ability of the public sector and government to give out concessions, to bring funding and to provide guarantees to raise long-term funding.
In conclusion, the UPA failed with this model miserably. Do you think the model itself is flawed, or was your policy flawed?
No, neither the policy was flawed, nor is the model substantially flawed. There were certain weaknesses, and I've had occasion to look at them in the Planning Commission. I think these were sought to be fixed. To some extent, they have been corrected, but there are still weaknesses which need to be removed. So neither on principle nor on policy will I fault PPP. As Shekhar said, these things can be fixed. And Sunil is right.
There is always a learning curve, and I think for the PPPs have come in the last 10 to 15 years. So whichever the government, whether it's the previous government or the present government, there has been a learning curve, and I'm sure a lot of those things will be rectified. But even in the airports which you just talked about, Sanjay knows that there was a learning curve and there were so many glitches, but we overcame them.
Okay, last word.
Keep getting away from PPPs because given resource constraints and managerial constraints, the path forward has to be to really have PPP.
Piyush Goyal, it's a model that failed miserably. Several people have burnt lots of money on it. How will you make it work?
I think the big and most important thing in PPP is credibility. If the private entrepreneur trusts the government to deliver on its promises, trust that the government will have a process which tomorrow does not get vitiated in the court of law, and has the confidence in the ability of government to fulfill all the commitments in time, I think the PPP model can be very successful. You must also recognize that the private sector is no less to blame. We may have blamed governments in the past, but the private sector, after all, in the UMPP, bid very poorly and are today a cause of distress in the system.
Okay.
Similarly, he has recognized in the budget that there were certain weaknesses, but there were certain success stories, what Praful just mentioned. We recognize those success stories, we take the learning, have a more nuanced and calibrated approach to documentation, understand the grievances that they have and keep an open mind. We don't need to be ostrich-like. In fact, towards the end of the last government, they have complicated the PPP even further. Every guy tells me, every industrialist tells me, now we don't want to even bid in the PPP model.
Okay.
So I think we need to have an open mind, have a dialogue which is already said we'll initiate on tax, on PPP, on everything, and come up with a framework which is robust, which is credible and, as you said, transparent and genuine, and lastly has a dispute resolution mechanism which is quick. That's what is announced.
We have dispute resolution mechanisms in all the PPPs, but they fail. I'll tell you why. One thing we need to fix. After the contract is signed, there shouldn't be changes in the contract.
Okay, all our guests have spoken. There were problems in the current system. The NDA is promising to fix them bit by bit, by and by. Piyush Goyal, Mr. Jaitley and Narendra Modi are all under watch. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on this broadcast in the Blockbuster Budget Roundtable. Really appreciate your presence. Thank you all very much. News and updates continue when we come back on the other side.